Hey, everyone. Welcome to the final panel of the day, the most energetic time slot of any conference. I just had my first Dorito since college. It was as zesty as I remember it. So we have a terrific lineup of investors today to talk about the financial environment around chatbots and the market interest in chatbots. If you're working on a chatbot at a startup or looking to get funding, this will hopefully enlighten you a bit. So let's go down the row and just ask each of you to introduce yourself and say what your involvement with chatbots has been so far.
Sure. My name is Alex Ferrara. I'm with Bessemer Venture Partners. I'm a partner with Bessemer. We have about a $4 or $5 billion of capital under management, $1.6 billion fund. We've been active investors in consumer businesses as well as B2B software businesses, and investors in Dashbot as well as one other company in the bot space. But view it as a very interesting area where we expect massive growth over the next five or so years, and so we're actively looking to invest in this space.
Thank you. My name is John Rodkin. I'm the managing director of SamsungNEXT in San Francisco. We are an externally facing group of Samsung, and we invest out of a $150 million fund that Samsung is the sole LP in. I personally am on the very early side of things, so I don't invest necessarily in Samsung strategic activities. I invest in software companies that may, in the long term, be in spaces that end up strategic to Samsung. We're also investors in Dashbot, and they work out of our office a few blocks away from here. We've looked at many other chat opportunities, but Dashbot so far is the only one where we've pulled the trigger.
Hi guys, I'm Courtney Nelson. I'm with Bertelsmann's venture fund, BDMI. Bertelsmann is a $20 billion media company headquartered in Europe, and so we have a number of different business units that are pretty active in looking at bots, including Penguin Random House, which is a book publisher that you probably are familiar with, as well as Arvado, which is a business process outsourcing unit that deals with more of the fintech, supply chain, customer service realm of things. So we're investing with the strategic interest of Bertelsmann in mind, but at the end of the day, we're structured like a traditional venture fund would be structured from a returns perspective, and we are investors in Spectrum, who's here today, and then, of course, Dashbot, so thanks for having us. And we're actively looking at other opportunities in the conversational economy, so that could be somewhere in the voice space or in the traditional text bot space.
Hey guys, Ryan Armbrust. I'm a partner at FF Venture Capital. We are a seed stage venture firm out of New York City. Investors in Dashbot here, and have two other investments in sort of the conversational UI bot space. One, the CEO was running around here earlier, a company called Wade & Windy in the recruiting area, and another one in customer service support, very early out of New York as well.
And I'm John Bruner. I work for O'Reilly Media and on our AI and data programs. And I also host the O'Reilly Bots podcast, which a bunch of people in this room have been on. I think Dennis was one of the first guests. So you can find it by Googling or something. So let's begin with the most difficult question, which is, are we seeing a slowdown in interest in bots? A lot of people became aware of bots a year ago or so when Facebook and Slack opened their platforms to bots. There was kind of a swell of interest, a lot of Medium posts about it, and now you're beginning to see Medium posts where people say that they're getting tired of chatbots. At the same time, it feels like a lot of larger, older companies are just becoming aware of chatbots and just becoming willing to invest in them. So what's going on at a very high level with the chatbot environment right now?
I'll give my view on this. I think the way we look at it, when we look at making investments, we develop these these investment roadmaps, we call them, and we look for substantial changes in the economy that we think are going to drive disruption. And in this particular area, we looked at a couple of years ago all the advances around deep learning and reinforcement learning and the impact it was having on speech recognition. And it really has only been in the last 2 years that things like Siri have started to actually work because of these advances. And we also look then at these voice-based interfaces like what you're seeing with with Alexa and Google Home and so forth. And so I mention this because I think when it comes to the Facebook ecosystem, it's still there is some fatigue because none of the companies, or very few of them at this point, have really been able to figure out their business models. Or to really gain massive traction. I think retention has been a real challenge, and I think a number of them will figure it out. It'll just take some time. But we're more focused on the voice-based ecosystem because we're seeing a lot of change there, and yet it's much earlier. It's much it's much younger. I mean, Amazon Alexa was released less than 2 years ago. And in the last 2 years, they now have, as of today, 5 products now, on the market with the Echo Show, and now you also have, Google coming out with products, and Microsoft and Harman Kardon, coming out with a product, and so we're sort of looking at the market, and we think, you've gone from 0 to maybe 10 to 15 million units shipped of the Amazon Echo. You're probably going to get to a very rapid, growth of 50 or 100 million over the next 2 years as more of these other companies come into the market. And so we actually think it's a very good time to be starting a company in and around this voice-based interface space because it's early days and there's this massive growth trend.
Yeah, I'll come at that a slightly different way. I agree with what Alex said about the fatigue. I think there's some fatigue in bots now. I think there is a lot of excitement for voice interfaces in general, and changing interfaces often lead to new companies and new products that develop that weren't accessible or available before the interfaces changed. But what we've seen over the last year is people investing in bots and then learning that acquisition costs and retention and things are problems in bots just like they are in other applications. And so people say, buy on the promise and sell on the news. I think part of the issue a year ago is nobody had metrics on this stuff, and now everybody has metrics. So now you have to prove that your business is going to work over time, and it gets a lot harder to prove that. So I think that's where some of the fatigue comes in, is there was some hope that these metrics wouldn't be the same for bots, but they turn out to be the same in many ways.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that what needed to happen in the bot ecosystem was more support on the platform side of things. And we've seen, I think, Amazon and Google and Facebook doing exceptional jobs of trying to re-engage people and add an educational layer to inform general users that aren't sitting in this room and that aren't in the tech community directly as to how they can interact with bots, how that's going to make that a better experience for them, why they should be looking at engaging with a publisher or a commerce product over a chat interface, and why this will lead to a better result for them as a reader or a consumer. And I think that there was a lot of bot building without end goal for a broader vision of how that would provide a better service for someone, and having the platform support to help inform both the developers and the broader community will help this. Some of the other things that our business units are looking at with a particular focus on our business process outsourcing division is trying to diligence what type of new development has come that really changes the ecosystem for companies within financial services, for example. Bots aren't necessarily totally new. People have been chatting with automated voice assistants or chat assistants to book an airline, to work with a bank for years. So it's a matter of figuring out what development actually needs to happen and what tech is actually groundbreaking here. And I think that's been something that's been tough to manage within the investor community.
Yeah, I can't really add too much more to all of that. I agree with pretty much all of that. I'd only say, at the end of the day, to me, chat, it's just a different form of, user interface, whether it's conversational with voice or via text. And as we start to understand more and more applications where that user interface becomes more valuable and not a nuisance, there's always going to be more opportunities there. So, as more and more people are experimenting, we'll find opportunities to where you can really drive advantage there.
A couple of you mentioned both chatbots and voice bots. Are these separate categories when you look at companies and evaluate them?
for us, no. I mean, we're kind of looking at it across conversational UI broadly, and as investors in Dashbot, obviously we like people to be on a whole bunch of platforms at once.
Anyone else want to take that?
Same for us.
Go ahead, Courtney.
Same for us.
Oh, okay. Everyone says same for us. So, cool. So let's talk about sort of the platforms you're interested in. You said get on as many platforms as possible. Is that advice you'd give to everyone, or do you also give a lot of like targeted advice? Well, you were speaking about voice and chat, I think. But if someone came to you and wanted to reach strictly a teen audience, would you be satisfied if they're only on Kick?
I'd be hesitant about reaching a teen audience because I don't know good business models there. But I think it depends on, again, the purpose of what you're building. And if you're going after consumers and young consumers, you need to meet them where they are. If you're going after business users, you have to meet them where they are. You may have to change behavior. You may have to create your own behavior. And so it's understanding, what the purpose of your bot is and where that needs to live to be the most effective, and being able to measure, where you're getting the most advantage on what platforms.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it depends on what the individual business is. But I do think they're very different. As was mentioned earlier. I mean, you look at a platform like Facebook, and they have 1.2 billion monthly active users, and it's a heavy ad-driven platform. And so I think in that case it's mainly brands looking to engage or cultivate audiences. It's emergent brands that are often looking to first and foremost grow their audience size, and that's a platform where you can do that, hopefully. I think there are also some dangers, to the Facebook platform. I mean, if you look at the history of what happened, in the last 10 years around, when they opened, the app ecosystem, and companies like Zynga, were high flyers and gained massive traction and substantial revenues, only to really kind of, flounder, at a later point. And today they're still, a $3 billion market cap company, and that's a great outcome by in many respects. But it was kind of a very challenged environment, and you've got a company there that's $3 billion in market cap, but Facebook is $400 billion, right? So I think in those types of environments, you can have some success, but you've always got to be very careful of the fact that you really have you have to play by the rules of the platform. I think one of the things that we think is interesting about the voice-based platforms is, while they're much smaller, and as I mentioned, I mean, the Echo maybe has 10 or 20 million install base today, which is really tiny. It is growing quickly, and we think it's likely to be very fragmented. And so I think fragmentation can be a startup's friend a lot of the time, whether you are a company like a Dashbot, where you're selling kind of the picks and shovels, so to speak, to developer tools to really enable third-party bots to build on a wide range of platforms, or if you're building a bot on your own, or a bot that's tailored to consumers. I think that fragmentation can be beneficial to you, because you can start to leverage one platform relative to another.
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Ryan was saying about making sure that you're aware of the audience that you're trying to target, whether that's like pure demographic data or looking at the end goal of what you're trying to accomplish. And for some of like the larger stage portfolio companies that we have, their interests at different points in time will change. So at one point in time, they're looking to engage with a reader to figure out how they're reading content to give them more information on a topic, but that same portfolio company also has a actual transaction element to it, because they're selling products as well. And so building out the capabilities on a different platform that actually allow them to transact and do more product discovery is important as well. And there's different ways of framing the decision tree that will live on an audio, on a text platform, and that will change depending on the demographic and the ultimate utility of the bot.
Yeah, I think that's similar to our point of view as to you pick the platform that's right for the application that you're trying to develop. And if what you're trying to do is reach a mass consumer audience, Facebook is obviously the right one. There is Facebook for Businesses, which is coming. There's Microsoft has its own stuff, which is pretty plugged into LinkedIn and Yammer and all of that. So there's stuff coming there. Kik for teens, Slack for businesses. So if you have a business application and you're trying to put it on Facebook Messenger or something, it might not be the exact right fit. So I would say for us, what we care about is the problem you're solving and how compelling that is to the user base and how much pain it's solving for them and how valuable that pain is. And regardless of the platform you use, one platform or several platforms, we just want to focus on you've chosen those platforms because it's the best way to kind of meet the users at their pain and solve what it is they're trying to do.
So you mentioned Microsoft Teams and Workspace by Facebook, their new workplace messaging platform. Both are attempts to sort of enter the market that Slack has found itself in. You could also add Cisco Spark, I think, to that list, addressing some of the concerns that larger businesses have about security and compliance and so on with the way that people use messengers. Talk about a little bit about sort of how bot startups will need to address the workplace market differently from the consumer market. A lot of bots that popped up initially were either consumer-oriented bots, or they were the kinds of bots that an individual inside a company might decide to install if the individual has a lot of autonomy. A bot to expedite IT tickets or something like that, where you're able to put it in. How is the process different when you need to sell to like an IT department at a giant employer?
I don't work with enterprise.
All right, we'll take that bullet. So, obviously when you're selling to an enterprise, lots of people are involved in the sales process. So you might have to answer the CFO as to why this drives efficiency. You might have to answer the CIO for security purposes. Then you have to answer the individual group leaders for why the pain is there. There are lots of companies that have a track record of selling to individuals initially and getting enough groundswell of support that then the item kind of rises through the organization. So you can think about that. Also, I think, to me, yeah, Dropbox has done that. Spiceworks, places like that. So, to me, there's the difference between consumer and enterprise, besides the standard enterprise sales issues, are a lot of the consumer bots were just for fun, and they got traction because they were kind of cool and they told you jokes and whatever. I think the enterprise bots have to be, why is the ROI of this better than another interface we could use, which drives a little more discipline into kind of how you think about what you're building and why you're building it, in my view.
I'm going to take your question on a little bit of a tangent, so bear with me. But I think one of the things that was interesting that I was reading about recently was Western Union building out a bot. And the thinking there was that the people that are using Western Union are increasingly millennial, apparently, and building out this bot is a content marketing strategy and also like a new user discovery methodology, as well as actually providing a utility factor. And so we've been speaking a lot about that with our business process outsourcing division, Arvado, and talking about how they can work with their partners to be in the right places, which for a lot of younger users is going to be on messaging platforms, if they're actually going to have a longer life cycle of retention for some of these customers that Arvado's partners are working with.
And the only thing I'll add, the two bots that we actually have invested in are both enterprise, and both not tools for enterprise workers, but tools to engage with your customer and make an easier utilize a platform which can be infinitely scalable and solves a lot of fast problems for your end user. So that isn't about a Dropbox model of digging into an organization and getting spread throughout an organization. It's about providing a utility to a division or a few people in an organization, and prove that one bot, when you can get in front of your customers and solve their needs easily, can do the work of a lot of individual workers. And so you can look at it from, there's internal bots, external bots, consumer bots. There's just a number of different angles that you can utilize this user interface to attack different markets.
Oh, we won't let us end there.
Conflict is good on panel discussions. I need to find something more controversial to talk about. I think to me, the idea of enterprise bots and adoption is really interesting because user retention is hard, as several of you have pointed out. Big employers love to mandate user retention on enterprise systems, right? The expense account system that many large companies work is like the worst user interface you've ever seen, but everyone still has to use it. You could imagine that when Accenture decides to install a giant messaging platform for all 400,000 employees and says, now you need to submit your TPS reports through the TPS bot, suddenly you have this kind of really sticky retention, right? Is that valuable, or is that sort of ephemeral?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue that that's super valuable. I mean, it's it's just mandating that people use a new workflow. It's just hard to imagine you're going to get any sort of interesting, strategic premium for that kind of a business. I mean, I think the thing that's very exciting about the enterprise bots is the monetization. It's a heck of a lot easier to sell enterprise software than it is to try to figure out how to monetize an audience on Facebook Messenger, or figure out how to monetize on something like Echo, where you both have no way to really monetize and a very small number of users today. So I think it's appealing, and we've looked at a range of companies that are trying to tap into corporate data for the purpose of customer support or business productivity. And I think what we've really what we always come back to, especially around use cases like customer support, is I think it will be transformative. I think it's going to really have a great impact on the way in which enterprises serve their customers, and the customers are going to be happier because they can just they can get the information or get the problem solved more rapidly. But the value really is, I think, in the data, and the data is owned by the companies. So I think a lot of the value ultimately will accrue to the companies that own that data, not to the third-party, bot providers that are trying to tap into that data to do a better job of answering a question for an end customer. And so that's, I think, what's made us a little bit cautious on the whole category as an example of companies that are helping with customer support, because it concerns me that maybe over time it's going to be difficult to really differentiate as you're providing technology that's mainly taking advantage of an enterprise's data that you don't own.
Courtney.
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat here that we're not looking at a lot of investments within the enterprise space for the most part, I think that at the end of the day, we're excited about conversational interfaces because they have the ability to provide a utility, but they also have the ability to surprise and delight users. And I think some of the other panelists talked about this earlier about how important excellent editorial creation is within a bot to make sure that there's a distinct personality and a distinct captivating element that gives people a great experience, whether they're actually accomplishing an end goal or just having fun interacting with the bot. And the better this experience is, the more data that people will choose to give to the bot. The better that the bot can be about proactively asking for information from the user that's interacting with it, the more surprise that the user gets and perhaps is willing to share, which becomes more meaningful over time, obviously, as personalization features can be built in here.
So how important is AI for a bot startup? I'll preface this by saying that at the F8 conference, I noticed that they demonstrated a lot of bots, but all of the bots that they demonstrated were process bots with practically no AI, no natural language understanding. They were we have Jira And now we have a bot that takes Jira tickets and dispatches them into Slack, and you can accept the Jira ticket by hitting a Slack response button. So this is very different from the promise of bots as they started to emerge about a year ago, where there would be these AI-driven conversational interfaces and would do amazing things for you. Do you think there's a lot of promise in bots that have no NLU, or perhaps even more promise in bots that don't have NLU, because the NLU turns out to be a tricky thing to deal with?
You have to collect your thoughts first for this one. Look, NLU is very hard. And I think that's the one thing that people are understanding more and more. Now, I think as you get more verticalized and you're focusing on understanding a language that solves a specific purpose, and you can put some confines around an AI, it becomes a little easier. I think it'll become easier over time. And right now, the process-oriented, bots just save time and energy in organizations and for process management, and it's very easy to execute on those. One of the things I love looking at Dashbot's things is just the differences in the number of bots being process oriented versus conversationally oriented, and how that's transitioning. But I do think as you collect more information in a specific niche area, you can utilize that to build more NLU around that area with smart people, and you have to, you kind of have to have that background and that research, in my opinion, to be able to create some of that, and you can drive some things forward. And I think for a little bit of time, there will be some companies that can utilize that to step ahead of other people, while other people are working on utilizing third-party platforms and technology to kind of just build bots, and then eventually, hopefully, NLU and more AI will come into play in some time forward.
Yeah, I mean, I would go far as to say, I think if you're a startup, an independent company, I mean, I think, the conversational, AI-based stuff, that's where all the value is. Like, I think if you're, Huffington Post, and you're looking to, figure out a way to get your users to, to read another article or to engage a little bit more, and you want to reduce the friction, it's not as important, right? It has value, but it's not going to be nearly so important as if you are an independent company trying to build something that's going to be unique. I think it's really critical to figure that out, and then also, again, like, figure out, what is the data on which you're trying to optimize.
I'll echo that. I think if you're just building a process bot, the data is probably not yours. There's probably not a lot of hard technology inside it. It would be very hard for somebody to value that. I'm also surprised that anybody would pitch a bot that they say doesn't have AI, because every pitch I see these days, whether it's bots or anything else, is very AI-centric, whether there's AI in it or not. So I think, that happens for a reason, because that's where a lot of the action is, and that's where the value is right now. So everybody tries to cloak themselves in that. My hope with all of the process bots, and kind of you work through these easy, low-hanging fruit interfaces, or the low-hanging fruit enabled by the new interface, will eventually lead to some new businesses that are enabled only because the machine learning and the AI have come around, and there's this way to interact with it that hasn't existed before. It's kind of happened as you've gone across other platforms in the past. So it will happen here too. It's just not clear yet exactly what it is.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'll go to questions in a second, but I want to do sort of a rapid-fire round where if each of you could just say what process or what vertical you think is the most interesting target for disruption by bots. This will help anyone who might want to pitch you over drinks later. Go.
E-commerce, online retail.
Interesting. I'm a lawyer. I think there's a lot of interesting bot stuff in law.
E-commerce.
Something I haven't thought of. I don't know. I don't. Everyone knows that we're gonna knock out knowledge workers, which will be fun when AI kind of comes through. But I don't know. I'm looking for the stuff that I haven't thought of that would work in the space. That's a lame answer, but
fair. So let's go to questions. All the way in the back. There's a question. Oh, sorry. Just wait for the microphone to.
Who? Oh, Harsha? Cool. Thank you, Art. Just a quick question, guys, actually. You spoke about understanding analytics now, right? So can you tell us the benchmarks that you guys are looking at, to whether fund the bot or not fund the bot? What are the benchmarks in terms of the metrics? Especially we are at the Dashbot conference, so I thought maybe I should ask this question, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to say the broad answer that it depends on exactly what your bot's aiming to do, what its goals are, and how if you're a consumer, again, if you're enterprise and you're selling seats, if you're a consumer pushing things out to individuals, how many people are listening, unsubscribing? If you need feedback back and forth, is it a one-time, I just need a little bit of feedback? Do I need people to have a 15-minute conversation? It just depending. This is such a broad space that the metrics just, to me, are so focused on what the goal of any one product or business is.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan there. The other caveat that I'd throw out here is from an investor perspective, our fund is primarily looking at things that sit within like this middleware broad ecosystem point for chat interfaces. So Spectrum is working with a number of different companies in this space. Obviously, same with Dashbot. So we're looking at metrics differently and probably more similar to the way you'd look at like valuing a traditional investment in a non-frontier tech space because we're not looking at single personality bots for which you might look at different types of like engagement patterns and things of that realm.
Yeah, I think similar to mobile, we look at active users, session length, retention, right? And so we look at what monthly active users, daily to monthly. We look at 30, 60, 90-day retention, and then try to look at what are people actually doing? I mean, is it valuable engagement, or is it something that's we think is just never going to be able to to monetize? And then we also look at what's the demographic. Is it a demographic that's depending on the company, is it monetizable via media, or is it something that's going to lend itself better to e-commerce? But I'd say that again, active users, session length, and retention.
John, do you have it?
No, same for
Any other questions?
Dmitry Stavitsky, I'm with Edwin AI. We are English learning company, but we use buzzword compliant technology stack with bots and voice assistants. So question for I guess, like everyone. When you were talking about bot fatigue, one of the reasons that I think John mentioned is that early on there was a hope that engagement metrics and like other parameters for bots would be different from apps, and this didn't quite work out. Well, first, actually two questions. First, is it fair to compare early bots with very mature apps? And the second, early in the app era, it was easier to get traction if you are early in an app store. Do you expect this effect to work for early bots who aren't overwhelmed by zillion of other bots?
Interesting. So parallels between bots and apps, and is it possible to get traction for bots just by being early as it was in the early days of the apps? Yeah. Good question.
I mean, we certainly hope so, and that's why we're spending a lot of time, looking at it early on. I mean, I think discovery is still a big challenge, but it's it's early enough that I think the early movers are going to have a big advantage. I think what's kind of missing, and I haven't seen yet, others may have, is we haven't seen a lot of the viral loop working, right? We haven't seen many instances where or any instances that I can think of where somebody, because they're early, is able to kind of capture low cost inventory to acquire customers. And then is able to sort of parlay that into some sort of viral loop where they can get their get the customer to tell their friends and so forth. I think it is from what we've seen at least there's the ability to effectively pay to acquire customers, and even given that there's no way to monetize or very few ways to monetize outside of a couple of examples, maybe travel or surveys. It doesn't seem like anybody's really able to acquire customers at an attractive rate, and again kind of parlay that into some sort of viral growth.
Yeah, I think to the first part, is it fair to compare bots in their early days to mobile apps now? Certainly not. I think the way we think about it is, or why I feel like there's some fatigue, is that there are numbers now. So now you can project those numbers forward and start to figure out monetization models and things, which you couldn't do in the early days. So that's how we think about the comparisons. Less, the numbers are higher or lower than equivalents in mobile, but now there are numbers, so now you can make projections.
The only thing I'd add is we're also comparing bots now to what we saw in apps then, and we saw the lifespan of a lot of different apps that look good and then kind of never really came to fruition. And I think you'll see that again now, where you get fatigued because you think something looks interesting, but from years past that the cycle's going to hit and it's not going to possibly not end up being as successful as you think it could be. And so I think the hope here is waiting until you can find the company that utilizes the interface properly to hook into customers, whether consumer or enterprise, early, and be the first one there to kind of figure out that proper use case.
Yeah, I think people are in a large part thinking about, or at first we're thinking about apps being the primary way that people were going to interact with them on a mobile interface, and that's going to be in a number of different formats, I think. So if I am a media company, I might have a mobile app version of my product, but I also might have a chat version of my product that also is going to be a way that people are going to interact with me. And the metrics across any of those things are going to be vastly different. So, I mean, we're in early days here, so I don't have a succinct answer for you on it, but I think we'll need to do more data analysis on the types of customers that are building things that are in multimodal fashion here, and the engagement that differs here based on the end goal of what they've built the product to do, essentially. And that will be different for an app versus a bot, I think.
Hi, thanks for the great content. My name is Ali. My question is about the chatbots that you have seen so far. I've heard a lot about chatbots in call centers, contact centers, automating workflows and things like that. Have you come across marketing or sales chatbots?
What was the sales and what was the other one?
Marketing and sales, yeah.
I'm trying to think of specific examples. If people do, please.
So one of the things that we've been actively looking at that's more on the marketing end of things is ways that bots can basically supplant what used to be meaningful to a commerce company or a publisher, which was a registered user or an email subscriber count. So we're looking at companies that are trying to basically create a proxy for a registered user by looking at marketing across a number of different channels and making sure the editorial voice creation and personalization is consistent across those channels. Because I think the email subscriber metric that a lot of people are still tying their engaged users to in large part is stale and doesn't speak to a lot of the generations that aren't going to be on email for the most part, and so that's something that we're looking at in marketing in particular.
We've seen a handful of bots that help salespeople try to be more effective. Like you reach out to a client and then they email you back, and maybe you want the bot to be able to answer their question or something. So we've seen a few of those. Nothing that has gotten us too excited. Less so on the marketing side.
Outbound bots seem tough to make work.
Any other questions? Anyone? Cool. Oh.
This is probably a really stupid question. I'm just looking at your watches here because I'm in the front row. Like, you guys have Apple Watches. How do you find them after these years? Wearables and bots, and how do you see all that coming together?
Oh, I don't have an Apple Watch. I have a Garmin, so yeah.
I have a Samsung.
Shameless promo.
I like to remind people it tells me the time.
Yeah.
So, it kind of does a job. And then anything extra is sort of icing on the cake for me. And when it can start doing things proactively, I'll be more excited. But it tells me the time.
I mean, I'll interject. I think I don't have one, as you can see, but they make it a lot easier to interact with always present messaging companions, right? It's way easier in theory to reply to text messages and Slack messages and so on. So I think if your question is sort of connecting wearables to bots, I think it's an interesting avenue because it brings the messaging platforms much closer to you all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the scary big picture thesis around a lot of this is that the more that we're looking at voice interfaces and chat interfaces, and the more we're looking at Internet of Things, the more it becomes a situation where we're in a world of ambient computing. And so I was chatting with somebody about this earlier, but there's this illustration that's basically a picture of somebody running out the door wearing their Apple Watch, and their refrigerator is don't forget to buy the milk later. And that's not that far away, frankly. And the best development and evolution of this space will be ways in which we figure out the best way to provide information the quickest way possible or the most meaningful way possible. And that's not always going to be via text, that's not always going to be via voice, and that's perhaps just going to be a general display. And we can get into a deep Internet of Things hole here, I'm sure, up here, but that's kind of our thinking on the big picture.
Hi, I have a question. So from the investor side, e-commerce, what do you guys think about it? Is e-commerce inside of Slack, Messenger? Is that something you guys would invest, or do you think that websites or mobile apps already took that market?
So what excites us about e-commerce in particular is, and I guess you can sort of link this back to the question about mobile apps versus what's different between the mobile app ecosystem in the early days and what we're seeing around bots and voice-based interfaces today. And I think one of the big differences is several years later now, you have large incumbent companies that have convinced users to give them their payment information. So Amazon has something like 250 million credit cards, user credit cards on file, right? And I think Apple has almost 1 billion. I think they have something like 800 million, payment information on 800 million people around the world. And so if you think about where we were when iOS first, the iPhone first launched, I mean, it just took a long time for people to buy the thing and start using it and put their credit card information in, get comfortable buying stuff, that way. Today you've got, this massive adoption of these, home, voice-based, interfaces. And I think that because companies like Amazon and Apple already have your payment information, it's going to create this really interesting, potentially low-friction way of driving e-commerce. And also doing it in a context where you haven't historically had much, where it hasn't happened in the past, right? Where you're at home, you're cooking dinner, you're talking with your spouse, or you're sitting on the couch, chatting, whatever it might be. And I think that's creating e-commerce opportunities there as well as in the car. I mean, it's sort of I think going to be an interesting way of tapping into kind of the natural flow that happens in the home when people think about, I'm out of a product and how do I order it? Or I'm thinking about where I want to go on vacation and I'm talking to my family about that. Or I'm thinking about, what are we going to do this weekend? And I can use the, via a voice-based interface, I can research and, and look into and then, actually buy, whatever, event or activity it's going to be. So that's I think why those are the types of things we're sort of poking around and trying to figure out.
Think of how many burgers you could order through Burger King's app.
Domino's. Right. Yeah. I think that e-commerce has the opportunity to be disrupted through chat and voice, in the sense that there can be a lot more product discovery and personalization baked in here. And then here comes a shameless plug for Dashbot, but there's hand holding that can reduce cart abandonment over this spectrum essentially, because if you're going to transact, if you're going to discover a product, if you're going to communicate with a bot that's giving you more information about a specific product, and then you're on the cusp of transacting and there might be some wavering there, that's when real time there can be an interjection of somebody else to help facilitate that purchase process and facilitate any lingering questions or something like that somebody might have about returns or product features, and taking that hurdle over the finish line essentially, which doesn't exist when someone's transacting in other forums right now.
Cool. Artie tells me that our time is up, and I think there's a bar opening.
Yeah.
So
we have a couple of quick thank yous, and then we'll do that.
Thank you all to the panelists. This has been a terrific discussion.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Thanks. It was nice to meet you. Yeah, meet you in person. Yeah. Thanks, guys. This is awesome.